The history of the Philippines. Before Magellan, 3000 BCE to 1521 CE, 3,500 years before Magellan's ships appeared on the horizon, the Philippine Islands had kingdoms with armies, international trade networks spanning from Japan to Arabia, multiple written languages, sophisticated legal systems, gold mining industries worth billions in today's money, and diplomatic relations with the most powerful empires in Asia. We weren't discovered. The ancient Filipinos, 3000 BCE to 1 CE. Let me take you back. Not 500 years, not 1,000 years, 5,000 years, 3000 BCE. Before the pyramids of Egypt were completed, before Stonehenge was built, before Chinese dynasties emerged. The islands we now call the Philippines were already inhabited by sophisticated societies. In 1976, archaeologists working in Cagayan Valley discovered rice cultivation sites dating to 3,400 BCE. That's 5,400 years ago. Rice paddies, irrigation systems, evidence of organized agriculture. You know what that means? While most of Europe was still in the Stone Age, hunting animals and gathering berries, Filipinos were growing rice in engineered fields with water management systems. But it gets better. In 2007, archaeologists in Callao Cave, also in Cagayan, discovered human remains dating back 67,000 years, not 5,000, 67,000. The so-called Callao Man represents one of the earliest human settlements in Southeast Asia. Now, I'm not saying those 67,000-year-old people were the direct ancestors of modern Filipinos. By 1000 BCE, the ancestors of modern Filipinos had mastered something that would change everything: maritime technology. These barangays could cross open ocean. And we know this not from legend. We know this because archaeologists have found barangay remains in Butuan, dating to 320 CE. We have the actual boats. They've been excavated, studied, and even reconstructed. And here's what those boats mean: maritime power. By 500 BCE, the Philippines was integrated into a maritime trade network connecting Southeast Asia. The Sahuin culture of Vietnam and the Kalanai culture of the Philippines shared pottery styles, burial practices, and trade goods. What were they trading? Gold, pearls, shells, hardwoods. In exchange, Filipinos imported glass beads, bronze items, and ceramics from Vietnam, Thailand, and beyond. This wasn't occasional contact. This was sustained, centuries-long economic exchange. The Philippines was part of the Asian economy 2,500 years ago. The rise of kingdoms, 1 CE to 900 CE. Now we move into a period where evidence gets even stronger. The first millennium CE. This is when kingdoms began to form. Understand something about pre-colonial Philippines. It was never one unified nation. It was hundreds of independent barangays, small communities of 30 to 100 families, and dozens of kingdoms controlling larger territories. Think of it like ancient Greece. Greece wasn't one country. It was Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes, dozens of independent city-states. That's what the Philippines was, a collection of independent political entities with shared culture but separate governance. By 1 CE, some of these barangays were consolidating into larger kingdoms, and we know this because of Chinese records. Chinese traders began visiting Philippine shores during the Han Dynasty around 200 CE. They came for gold, pearls, tortoise shells, and tropical hardwoods, and they recorded what they saw. Chinese texts describe Filipino communities as organized, with leaders they called datu, and populations engaged in farming, fishing, metalwork, and trade. These weren't isolated villages. These were economically diversified societies with social hierarchies and political structures. But the real breakthrough in our understanding comes from one artifact, the Laguna copperplate inscription. In 1989, a worker dredging sand from the Lumbang River in Laguna found a copper plate. It was corroded, damaged, and covered in sediment. Nobody thought much of it at first, but when scholars cleaned it and examined the inscriptions, they realized they were looking at the oldest known written document in Philippine history. The text was written in a script similar to Old Javanese and Old Malay, with Sanskrit loanwords. When translated, it turned out to be a legal document, specifically a debt forgiveness notice. Here's what it says, in simplified translation. Before we go deeper, our goal on this video is to get 500 likes and share your reaction in the comments. Subscribe to the channel. In the Saka year 822, which corresponds to 900 CE in the Western calendar, the Lady Angkatan and her brother, with their children, are cleared of their debt to the Commander-in-Chief of Tondo. This debt has been forgiven by the authority of Jayadewa. Now, why is this monumentally important? First, this document proves that by 900 CE, Filipinos had a writing system, not just a symbolic system, a full written language capable of expressing complex legal concepts. Second, it proves the existence of a legal system. Debt, forgiveness, authority figures with titles. This is bureaucracy. This is governance. Third, it mentions specific places: Tondo, Paila, Binwangan, Pularan. These are all in Luzon. This document proves that by 900 CE, there was an organized kingdom in Luzon with multiple settlements under centralized authority. Fourth, the dating system. Saka year 822. The Saka calendar was an Indian calendar system. The fact that Filipinos used it means they were culturally connected to the broader Indian-influenced world of Southeast Asia. They were part of the Sanskrit cosmopolitan culture that linked India, Indonesia, Cambodia, Thailand, and yes, the Philippines. Fifth, and this is crucial, the document is on copper, not paper, not bark, not bamboo. Copper. That means they had metalworking technology advanced enough to create thin copper sheets suitable for inscription. That's not basic metalwork. That's sophisticated metallurgy. The Golden Age, 900 CE to 1400 CE. Now we enter what I call the Golden Age of pre-colonial Philippines. From 900 CE to 1400 CE, Filipino kingdoms reached their peak of power, wealth, and international influence. Let's start with the Kingdom of Tondo. Tondo was located in what is now Manila, specifically around the mouth of the Pasig River. Why there? Because the Pasig River was the highway to the interior of Luzon. Traders from Pampanga, Bulacan, Laguna, and beyond brought goods downriver to Tondo. From Tondo, those goods were sold to foreign merchants who came by sea. Chinese records from the Song dynasty describe Ma'ai, the ancient name for Mindoro and nearby areas, but scholars believe Ma'i referred more broadly to the Manila Bay region, including Tondo. According to Chinese sources, Mai was prosperous. They describe it as a place where foreign traders came to exchange goods for gold, beeswax, pearls, and cotton. The Chinese were particularly interested in gold, So much gold that Chinese records called the Philippines the land of gold. Not metaphorically, literally. The Philippines was known across Asia as a source of gold. Where was all this gold coming from? Gold mines. The Philippines has natural gold deposits in Benguet, Paracal, Masbate, and other regions. Pre-colonial Filipinos mined this gold using traditional methods: placer mining in rivers, digging shafts in mountains, panning alluvial deposits. And they didn't just mine gold, they crafted it. Filipino goldsmiths created intricate jewelry, necklaces, earrings, bracelets, anklets, using techniques like lost wax casting, filigree, and granulation. These weren't crude chunks of metal. These were works of art. When Spanish colonizers arrived in the 1500s, they were stunned by the amount of gold Filipinos had. Spanish records describe chiefs wearing gold armor, warriors with gold-hilted weapons, women covered in gold jewelry. One Spanish priest wrote, "The natives wear so much gold that it seems they are loaded with it." Another said, "Even slaves wear gold." Where did all that gold go? Spain melted it down and shipped it to Europe. The gold that funded Spain's golden age in the 1500s and 1600s, a significant portion came from the Philippines. They took our gold and then taught us we were poor. But back to the kingdom of Tondo. Tondo wasn't just wealthy, it was diplomatically connected. In 1001 CE, the Chinese emperor recorded receiving a diplomatic mission from the kingdom of Butuan. The envoys brought gifts, gold, pearls, and tribute as part of establishing formal state-to-state relations. Think about what that means. In the year 1001 CE, 520 years before Magellan, a Filipino kingdom sent official diplomatic representatives to the Chinese imperial court. They negotiated trade agreements. They presented credentials. They engaged in diplomacy as an independent sovereign state. This wasn't a primitive tribe begging for favors. This was kingdom-to-empire diplomacy between equals. And it wasn't just Tondo and Butuan. By the 13th century, multiple Filipino kingdoms were flourishing. The Rajanate of Butuan in northeastern Mindanao, the Kingdom of Maynila in Manila Bay, the Sultanate of Sulu. Islam arrives in 1450 CE. A Muslim missionary named Sayyid Abu Bakr arrived in Sulu from Sumatra. He married the daughter of Raja Baginda, a local ruler, and established the Sultanate of Sulu. Stronger ties to the Muslim world, Brunei, Malacca, Sumatra, and eventually the Ottoman Empire, naval power. The Sulu Sultanate became one of the most formidable maritime powers in Southeast Asia. At its height, the Sultanate of Sulu controlled the entire Sulu archipelago, parts of Mindanao, northern Borneo, including Sabah, which is why the Philippines has a territorial claim to Sabah today. It was historically part of Sulu. Trade routes connecting the Philippines to the Malay world. The Sulu Sultanate's economy was based on trade, pearls especially. Sulu pearls were famous across Asia. Also sea cucumbers, birds' nests, and slaves. Yes, slavery existed in pre-colonial Philippines, and the Sulu Sultanate was a major participant in the Southeast Asian slave trade. The Sulu Navy used fast boats called vintas. These boats were smaller than balangays, but faster and more maneuverable. Sulu warriors were feared as raiders. They could strike coastal towns, take captives, and disappear before anyone could respond. But here's what's remarkable about the Sultanate of Sulu. It was internationally recognized. In 1457, the Sultan of Sulu sent envoys to China. The Chinese emperor received them and granted official recognition. In the early 1500s, the Sultanate established diplomatic relations with the Ottoman Empire. Yes, the Ottoman Empire. The Sultan of Sulu received recognition from the Caliph in Istanbul. Think about the scale of that. A kingdom in the southern Philippines had diplomatic connections stretching from Beijing to Istanbul. That's a 10,000-kilometer span. The Sultanate of Sulu was a player in global geopolitics. And when the Spanish arrived in the late 1500s and tried to conquer Sulu, they failed. For over 300 years, the Spanish tried to subjugate Sulu. They never fully succeeded. The Sultanate resisted, fought back, and maintained independence. It wasn't until the Americans arrived in the early 1900s that Sulu was forcibly incorporated into what became the Philippines. Even then, resistance continued. The Sultanate of Sulu, established in 1450, exists in a ceremonial capacity today. The current Sultan, Muezzul Lail Tan Kiram, claims legitimate succession from the original sultans. Whether that claim is legally valid is debated, but the historical fact remains. The Sultanate of Sulu was a powerful Islamic kingdom that resisted colonization longer than almost anywhere else in the Philippines. Writing, law, and culture. Now I want to talk about something the colonizers tried very hard to erase: Filipino literacy. Before the Spanish arrived, Filipinos could read and write. Not just kings and priests, everyone, men and women, rich and poor. The script was called Baybayin, a syllabic script related to Indonesian Kavi script, Javanese script, and Balinese script. It's part of the broader family of Brahmic scripts that originated in India and spread across Southeast Asia. Baybayin consisted of 17 basic characters, 14 consonants, and 3 vowels. It was written horizontally, left to right, or sometimes bottom to top, depending on the region. Filipinos used Baybayin to write on bamboo, bark, and palm leaves. How do we know this? Spanish colonizers recorded it. In 1590, a Spanish priest named Father Chirino wrote, "All the Filipinos, men and women, write in their own characters. They write on bamboo and the bark of trees." Another Spanish priest, Father Francisco Colin, wrote in 1663, "Almost everyone knows how to read and write. Even women and children learn easily." Let that sink in. In the late 1500s, nearly all Filipinos were literate in Baybayin. At the same time in Spain, literacy rates were around 20 to 30%. In England, maybe 30 to 40%. Filipinos had higher literacy rates than Europeans. But the Spanish systematically destroyed Baybayin. They burned documents. They forbade its use in schools. They replaced it with the Latin alphabet and Spanish language. Why? Because Baybayin writings contained pre-Christian stories, laws, and genealogies that contradicted Spanish narratives. If Filipinos remembered their own history, they might resist colonization, so the Spanish erased it. Today, we have only a few surviving examples of Baybayin writing: the Laguna copperplate inscription, a few documents preserved by Spanish priests who recorded them for study, some inscriptions on pottery and metal artifacts, but the knowledge is being revived. Modern Filipinos are relearning Baybayin. It's taught in some schools. It's used in art and tattoos. It's a symbol of cultural resistance. Now let's talk about law. Pre-colonial Filipinos had sophisticated legal systems. The most famous example is the Code of Kalantiao, a legal code supposedly written in 1433 by Datu Kalantiao of Panay. The code lists 18 laws covering crimes like murder, theft, adultery, and disrespect to elders. However, Historians now believe the Code of Calantiao is a 20th century fabrication created by a Filipino writer named Jose E. Marco. It's probably fake. But that doesn't mean pre-colonial Filipinos didn't have laws. They absolutely did. Spanish colonizers recorded extensive customary laws, which they called the customs of the Tagalogs. These customary laws covered property ownership and inheritance, marriage and divorce. Yes, pre-colonial Filipinos could divorce, debt and contracts, crime and punishment, social obligations and hierarchies. For example, pre-colonial Philippine law recognized different social classes: datu, the ruling class, chiefs and leaders; maharlika, the warrior class, free landowners with obligations to the datu timawa; free commoners, who owned no land but were not enslaved; alipin, dependents, either alipin namamahay, those who lived in their own homes and served part-time, or alipin sa gigilid, those who lived with their masters and served full-time. This wasn't slavery like American chattel slavery. Alipin status was more like serfdom or indentured servitude. Alipin could buy their freedom. They could inherit property. Their children weren't automatically alipin. The system was hierarchical, yes, but it was also fluid. Someone could rise or fall in status based on wealth, marriage, or service to a datu. And here's something remarkable. Women had significant rights in pre-colonial Philippines. Women could own property independently. They could inherit land. They could engage in trade. They could divorce their husbands if mistreated. They could become spiritual leaders. The babaylan, or priestesses, were often women. When the Spanish arrived, they were shocked by how much freedom Filipino women had. Spanish society was patriarchal and restrictive. Women couldn't own property, couldn't divorce, couldn't engage in public life. But in the Philippines, women were economically and socially active. The Spanish described it as immoral and worked to suppress it. They imposed Spanish gender norms, and over centuries, Filipino women lost many of what the Spanish found. 1521. Now we come to 1521, the year Magellan arrived. What did he actually find? Because if you believe Spanish propaganda, he found savages who needed saving. The truth?